Okay, we're going to go ahead and get started. I just want to have Nuket say just a few words.
Good evening, everyone, and thank you so much. It's great to see everybody in person for once. And for everyone that's online, thank you also for joining us. It's great to be able to have this kind of an education session and touch so many people, quite frankly. And more so, if anything, our thanks to Pitt as a continued sponsor for continuing education for all of us in the Southwest District. I'm proud as the chair to be affiliated with these opportunities all along. I should introduce myself as well. I'm sorry, I kind of stepped over that completely. My name is Nuket Curran. I'm actually the current chair for our Southwest District. Certainly, if you have any questions about what we do for our local organization and across the state, please feel free to come up and talk to me afterwards. We'd love to have you to participate. Well, I hope that you all enjoy the evening. And again, thank you and look forward to hearing from you, Steve.
Thank you. So I'm Jay Ergang. I'm the professor and chair of the Department of Physical Therapy. And I'm extremely happy to welcome everybody to the 27th annual Scully Visiting Scholar Lectureship. I can't believe it's been 27 years, but it has been. Time is going by. If you take a picture of the QR code, that'll lead you to a survey so that you can submit a form that we can provide you with a certificate for continuing education credits if you need that for the upcoming relicensure. So I would like to, again, welcome members and guests of the district. And I would also like to welcome students from any of the programs in the area, including Duquesne, Chatham, Slippery Rock, Seton Hill, the PTA program at Community College of Allegheny County. And then tonight we have students from our residential and our hybrid program here at the University of Pittsburgh. So welcome, students. So the purpose of the lectureship that was established by Rosemary Scully was to promote the Department of Physical Therapy at Pitt by inviting a distinguished scholar to give a provocative lecture to the local community and to meet with students and faculty in open forums and discussions. So this year's visiting scholar is Dr. Stephen George, who is currently the Laszlo Ormandy Distinguished Professor in Orthopaedic Surgery at Duke University. He received his bachelor's degree in physical therapy at the school south of the border, also known as WVU. He came for finishing school here to Pitt to get his PhD in rehabilitation science, and then he did a postdoctoral fellowship at the University of Florida. He was at the University of Florida for many years until he was recruited to his vice chair position in orthopedic surgery at Duke. Dr. George's research interests include the use of the biopsychosocial models to predict and prevent transition to chronic musculoskeletal pain. He's been well funded by the NIH, the Department of Defense, and PCORI, and has over 300 publications. He's received multiple awards from the APTA, including recognition as a Catherine Worthingham Fellow, the John Maley Lecture, and pretty much every one of the research awards that is offered by APTA. So I'd like to welcome Dr. George. And as I mentioned, when I talked to Steve, we wanted him to do something provocative. So his title is The Rise and Fall of Evidence-Based Practice. Welcome, Steve.
Thank you, Jay, and everyone else. The finishing school joke never ever gets old, does it? But seriously, thank you for the very kind introduction. This is just an incredible honor for me. I started my career here clinically. I think it's just an incredible opportunity to deliver the Scully lecture. My first apartment was 2 blocks away, 244 North Bellafield. It's not there anymore. The School for the Blind took it over and did something else. But I used to walk by this building every day when I worked in the hospital for about 2 years. And then I started walking the other way to go to Baum Boulevard for the Center for Sports Medicine. So to be able to deliver this lecture in Oakland it's just an incredible honor, and I'm happy to be here. The other part, of course, is all the familiar faces. I wish I could single out everyone to thank them, but it's great to feel the support. I am going to mention a few, so sorry if you're left off the list. It was tough sledding to get on this list, but I kind of want to do it in chronological order. So my nephew is here, Matthew Strange. I won't point him out, but he is starting his career applying to physical therapy schools. So there's that end of the spectrum. Robert, or Rabs, don't call me Robert Shaw. I think he made it. He was texting me, is it the building near Soldier and Sailors? And I said, yes, it was. So, but Rabs trained with me at WVU. He also took some master's classes with me. So we finished together in 1994. Jen Brock, I still think how funny it is. She's been a wonderful friend and colleague, but completely coincidentally, we were at the same staff orientation at UPMC as staff physical therapists. This is before any of us were going to be research. She probably was because she's smart and sophisticated, but I didn't know I was going to be a researcher. And that was like January 3rd, 1995. We went in and did the orientation. And who are you? Who are you? We were the only 2 PTs, so of course, and she's been a great friend and colleague since then. And then I finished my PhD in 2002. So it's 20 years ago. It's what a time to reflect, doing this lecture 20 years from when I finished my PhD. And I was lucky enough to be part of one of the best cohorts, I think. I'm biased, but historically, one of the best PhD cohorts in our field. I'm speaking to the home crowd, so I can say that. And 2 of them are here, Sarah Piva and Greg Hicks, who were just really good sounding boards. We grew and learned together. We mostly learned from Sarah, but we did learn together. And how cool is it? We just finished a multi-site trial together. So we circled back and the chemistry was still there. So, I could go on and on, but I don't think that's provocative. So, but I do want everyone to know this means a lot. And even if I muck up the rest of it, I don't really care because I got to thank some people and just let you know that I appreciated the opportunity to go to finishing school here, Jay. So that's the appreciation slide. I did that one. All right. So a little bit of context here. I think it's important to set the stage. One of the things you need to realize, most of my research, most of my clinical background is in musculoskeletal pain. So a lot of the lessons that I've learned and I'm going to use as examples are musculoskeletal pain related. I do think they have application to other patient populations. So I don't think it's so narrow, but I do admit that's one of my biases and my lenses. Other lenses I wanted to share is as a practicing clinician, as I'm walking back and forth on the Bigelow there, I perused the peer review literature. You could do that as a bachelor trained physical therapist. Imagine that. I looked at the peer review literature and I was very interested in it. During my research training, I was exposed to key evidence-based principles in the Red Book era, which I think you'll see again a little bit later. As an educator, I taught evidence-based practice to undergraduate. I actually taught 1 year here at SHRS, and then most of it was in entry-level doctor of physical therapy program. I taught an evidence-based practice sequence 1 year to master's students, and then they transitioned to a DPT. And then as a clinical researcher, I've tried to conduct studies that have added to the evidence base. So that's my background in addition to the musculoskeletal pain. So a little bit of where I'm coming from. In a little different way than Jay, introduced me. I always love the introduction because expectations are up here. And then, it's just the rest of the day, it's just the lower the expectations. So the charge, as Jay mentioned, is to be provocative. So you have to start a little bit with thinking about the title. And I know at least one person in the audience thought the title he described it as ominous in an email. So I thought that was a good start. So, yeah, that's Dr. Coyle is laughing there. I think he was, yeah. So good call. So there's really two books that I thought of. One is The Rise and Fall of the Third Reich, and the other is The Rise and Fall of the Dinosaurs, that use this title very definitively. The Rise and Fall of the Third Reich is an aspirational goal of mine. We had an incredible high school teacher at Ithaca High who really got us interested in World War II. And he said, if you want to know the definitive history of Nazi Germany, you have to read this book. So I was like, okay. And I've tried many times. I just can't do it. I would like to, though. So instead, my inspiration is more from this book, which is The Rise and Fall of the Dinosaurs. This is a really good book. And no, there's not a ton of pictures in it, but one of the things it did quite well is it tackled a really complex problem, and it just did a really amazing job. When you think about the evolution of the dinosaurs occurring over 100 million years, it was just done in a very narrative fashion. And I really liked it. And I thought, the more I thought about the rise and fall of evidence-based practice, I thought there were some parallels with dinosaurs. So you're going to have to entertain me a little bit and go along with this dinosaur theme. This is a really good book. And I just found out that the follow-up to this is The Rise and Reign of the Mammals. And I already have it. Yeah. It just came out this month. My wife got it for me. And I was like, do you think the lecture's ruined because other people will know about the mammal book? And she said, I would be okay. So here's what we're going to do. Talk a little bit about the rise. Why did it catch on? I think talk about its vulnerabilities, and then, talk a little bit about what's going to happen next. So the rise of EVP, and this is my perspective. I'm certainly not a medical historian, but when you think about the dinosaurs, and one of the things this book does really well is there is a period before dinosaurs, Permian, and it's very muddy. The earth is very different. It's swampy. And a lot of people think these are dinosaurs, but they're not. These are all precursors to dinosaurs. And in fact, most of the really big ones die out, and it's the little small ones that survive and become dinosaurs. But the point of this slide, other than to talk about the Permian period, is there was an unformed period before the age of the dinosaurs. Similarly, medicine was messy and unformed for a very long time. And depending on what source you use, and I used Wikipedia, showing off my full scholarly prowess there. But up until the 19th century, medicine was largely Permian. There was, I kind of summarize it as the science, magic, and religion phase. There was a little bit of each of those as people were trying to figure out ailments. And that actually was the name of a course I took at WVU, which I really, really liked, Science, Magic, and Religion. One of you could talk, there's so many different theories, and it depends on the part of the world. But, one of the ones that a lot of people seem to relate to is the Greek theory of humorism, which is about the balance between, these four vital fluids: black and yellow bile, phlegm, and blood. And if you think about what, that's what people were observing in human bodies back then. So it kind of makes sense. What's surprising is how long this, the four humors persisted. The change from a Permian unformed is not something that occurred at one point in time, but these are some of the factors that people think about, the rise of modern medicine is, understanding germ theory, wars, wars, you don't think of it, but wars have been major, innovators for medicine and healthcare, which is very intriguing. I think it's completely appropriate, the name of this lecture, and in our profession, the number of awards and things that are named for women. Women as healers and physicians is an important mark of modern medicine. Public health and epidemics, which we're all well trained in that now, and then statistical methods. So these are the factors that, when you mix them together, kind of led to modern medicine. And dinosaurs start to look a lot like dinosaurs. These are the three major periods where dinosaurs, ruled the earth: Q, Jurassic Park. There's the Triassic, Jurassic, and Cretaceous, and they start to look like the dinosaurs we all know and love. So why did evidence-based practice catch on? I think I thought about the most concise way to do this and actually stumbled upon David Sackett's obituary published in The Guardian. And there were some really, I thought, compelling quotes about what David Sackett did. And we don't have time to go into, all of its contributions, but generally considered, one of the major pushers of evidence-based practice from Canada into the US. And you can see, he really pushed method design, analysis, and reporting, especially of clinical trials. Believed in putting everything to the test. This is the type of conceptual framework he's bringing. I like this because we don't think of this as radical, but, promoted a radical way of thinking about diagnosis and treatment that was based on data and moved away. So he's pulling us away from that Permian period with data-informed approaches. Getting away from the long-held reliance on subjective judgment, tradition, and authority. That's that magic science and religion stated a little bit differently. Judgment, tradition, and authority. Most people don't associate that with medicine now. Still have to practice sometimes, but we don't associate it that way. So why did it catch on? Those are some good quotes. And when I thought about it for this lecture, it's because it provided the structure. So here we have the 2x2 table from the Greeks. So they're balancing yellow bile, they're balancing blood, they're balancing phlegm. You can see they also have an earth part that are associated with them too. So you work in fire, can get a little bit complicated. They turn that table a little bit, and then we have the 2x2 tables, which, are the joy for some people and the disdain of. I always estimated about 2/3 of the DPT students hated evidence-based practice. So I always used to say this was what 1/3 of the students would enjoy. Maybe it's better here at Pitt, but that was my estimation at Florida. But this is a very different 2x2, and those squares are filled up with data, and it's a balance of those numbers now. It's not a balance of the humors; it's a balance of the numbers, and that provided some structure. There was also a structure on how you go about asking research questions. You ask a question, you acquire the evidence. There was a whole process. And then there was this conceptual model that had clinical experience married with evidence and patient preferences. So again, structure, right? We're getting structure now to medicine. And it moved us, from that Permian look. And it also provided taxonomy. One of the reasons people like dinosaurs is it's relatively easy and lots of fun to classify them. And here, we had a taxonomy where now we're going from cohort to randomized trials to meta-analyses. And now we had a taxonomy for evidence, which was relatively new. So we could actually rate evidence and we could put it in its proper place and compare it. The dinosaurs, it's more based on time and things like that, but kind of the same idea. So what is happening in PT? That's a really big lens. That's my, but in PT, this had been in the air in PT. There's a lot of quotes. I like Eugene Michael's presidential address, this part about how do you know method X is any good? Because you still unfortunately hear, these explanations. I think we've gotten better. But I like this frame, this idea, how do you know it's any good? It's, not because I see it work every time, not because I just know it is. And, beauty is in the eye of the beholder. And so too is, judging how treatments work. This is something that was said in 1969. So clearly, a thread of evidence-based practice specific to physical therapy. As was mentioned, I trained here, and this really was in the ether in the late 90s and early 2000s. I think I was in the first master's class that used this book as a required text. I could be wrong, but I do remember being exposed to this very early in a research design class, and it may have been when Tony and Jay were teaching. I still have the book. I dropped the syllabus, so I couldn't verify that. But this was something that they took what was a traditional kind of research class where you learn about t-tests and ANOVA and things like that are, so fascinating, and put a little bit more action into it with diagnosis, prognosis, intervention, and what are the optimal designs and what are the best ways to estimate that statistically. And then also, one of the hallmarks of being here is you don't just talk about it, you actually do it. So the faculty were putting the airplane on the runway, right, Tony? They were putting the airplane together on the runway. So they were doing trials while teaching them. But it was really a great time to be exposed to that. And I think what's important is it made people like me realize this is not something that's outside of this is part of our profession. We are going to do this too, and we're actually going to actively participate in it. And finally, when you think of local driving factors, it was one of the big parts of the Vision 2020 directive. You can see it's right there. What is it in between a doctor of physical therapy and practitioner of choice? Evidence-based practice was in this pillar. So it was becoming part of every emerging program or programs that were transitioning from master's to doctoral or doctor of physical therapy at that time. This was one of the things they had to keep their eye on the ball. So this is the hype cycle. Some of you may be familiar with it. So this is kind of where we are, with evidence-based practices at this point. It provides structure. We know it can be adopted and applied in physical therapy. So that's the peak of inflated expectations. So the fall, I like this quote. There's a lot of quotes on falling. Most of them involve getting back up, but this one I liked. An era can set to end when its basic illusions are exhausted. And that's kind of what drove me for this next part. Now, for the dinosaurs, it's a little bit easier. It's now pretty widely accepted that there was a big asteroid. But one of the things that's interesting, it wasn't just the asteroid, it was when it was hit, it was during a high volcanic activity time, and also where it hit. So it was the asteroid had a lot to do with it, right? But there were some other factors involved. So the fall of evidence-based practice is a little different. These aren't actual asteroids. These are the illusions, that are coming. And I've broken them into 3 different illusions that I think have been exhausted for EBP. And we'll spend a little bit of time going through each of these. This illusion is that, have you seen this? This is the monster illusion where one looks bigger than the other, but they're both the same. So this is a famous illusion. So I chose this to represent the illusion that has been exhausted of internal validity is greater than external validity. So for those of you who think about these things, which you can have these, they're kind of a yin and yang. You can have them, but it's really hard to have both of them. So a lot of times in research design, we talk about them being, in tension or in stress is the word they use there. Tension is on the title slide, so that's good. For this crowd, I think of it as West Virginia and Pitt fans. So, when they're in the same space, there's going to be some tension, there's going to be some stress, and it's debatable whether they should be in the same place at the same time, right? So that makes it semi-relatable. But when you talk about internal validity, it's really about the rigor, it's about the control, it's about repeatability. This is kind of I call it like the textbook science, right? This is what a lot of people are taught is science. You got to control it, it's got to be repeatable, and very high rigor. The reason for that is it's all about cause and effect, apparently, in internal validity. You want to know what you're doing causes the effect that you're measuring. And the only way to do that is to be rigor, control, and have it be repeatable. And these generally are viewed as efficacy type of studies. External validity is the other side of the coin. And now we're talking about, how does this generalize? Can it be applied in different populations? The term effectiveness a lot of times is associated with this. I like to think of it as free range research. You kind of set it loose and see what happens. Some of the chickens are going to get, eaten by wolves and hawks, but some of them are going to survive and you can learn from that. But in this case, it's like free range research. We're seeing what happens. And what we are taught, this is part of the illusion part, is I think of the analogy of potential and kinetic energy. What we are taught is, there's potential energy from physics, and then that is transformed into kinetic energy. And that's something everyone has learned in physics along the way. You may not remember it, but that's the review slide there. We kind of have the same assumption, or are taught the same assumption with eternal validity, that we have internal validity, we demonstrate it, and then when you drop the ball, it turns into external validity. So we're loading up the potential energy with efficacy, and we're dropping it, and that will translate into effectiveness. And there's the word that I think is part of this illusion, is the balance between the truth in the study and the truth in real life is how well it generalizes. And, that assumption a lot of times is that ball is going to drop when we have efficacy. The potential energy is there. We're going to drop it. It's going to be translated into kinetic energy. This is the fancy version for people who, are smarter than me, but my cartoon brain still thinks of it like this, the generalization. And I'll give you a perfect example. I work a lot in psychologically informed practice, and there's some early randomized trials that showed promise. One of them I did here at Pitt as part of my dissertation in 2002. There's that 20 years. We did some in Jacksonville too. So we loaded that up. That can work. And then there's larger randomized trials that come out, and one of them it worked well, and others, and I was part of some of these. I'm picking a lot on my own work or work that I've been involved with. But I was involved with the Target trial, and actually the first trial showed better outcomes, and every trial since has not. So what has happened is, we let go of the ball, and it's floating there. It's not being transformed into the kinetic energy that we hoped it would. There's some demonstration of efficacy, but when we put it in the free range, it's not working. So one of the illusions then is we don't know about this generalization just from the internal validity, and it's not predictable. Why does the kinetic energy example work? Gravity, right? Gravity is pretty predictable. This other G word, generalization, is not nearly as predictable. And that to me is one of the illusions of evidence-based practice. The next one, compatible with precision and personalized medicine. This is the impossible trident illusion. So this one, it hurts if you try to figure it out. So, EBP encourages this type of hierarchy. I've already talked a little bit about it with the taxonomy, going up to systematic reviews. And we are encouraged to climb that pyramid. We're encouraged to ask research questions that will lead to definitive answers. So for this section, I leaned on some of the cartoon philosophers from my past. See, for the DPT students, back in the day, you had a newspaper and you'd open it and you'd read the sports and the comics. And in the comics, there were sometimes some humorous types of things. And as I've grown older, Lucy is probably one of my favorite comic, characters from Peanuts. I know this is dating me for a lot of people, but you can look at this. But one of the things about Lucy is she's very sure and steadfast. So, Charlie Brown likes to philosophize on this bridge. This time Lucy is kicking it off and she's saying, tell me something. Do you think there's more good or there's more bad people? And Charlie Brown gives the answer that a lot of us would, who's to say? And Lucy, I will, I'm going to determine that. And we have a design for that. It's a randomized controlled trial. We have a design that will give you that answer. I like this picture because apparently it's a treatment to prevent people from turning half blue. You might have to look at that for a second, but it seems to be effective in the early follow-up. But the nice thing with randomized trials is you get that answer. Lucy, who says, are you going to do this? Yes, I will get that answer. And this can be boiled down to, what you're interested in is either better or it's the same for the way most trials are designed. So that is answering an important question, but, potentially a limited question. Can it work? And I think, the more I've been involved in research, that's kind of a boring question. Can it work? And it has very little relevance to personalized medicine. It really does. So we have to turn to our other great, comic strip hero. This is Calvin, who you may have seen him on the back of Ford or Chevy trucks. But the Calvin has lots and lots of questions. And, that's good. So philosophically, he's a little more aligned with this type of approach. Well, who responds best to this treatment? What is the best way to accurately predict this outcome? And, how do I measure pain without interrupting workflow? These are all really important questions if you are thinking about personalized approaches, but they aren't always addressed, with a classic randomized trial design. So we have this kind of pull. The can it work is one direction, and often it's hard to answer both of these questions. It really is. And I'll give you, like I said, I'm picking on things that I've been involved with. I'll give you an example of a recent foray into this area. This document, which we spent a ton of time on, it's a pretty strong document. This is an update to the low back pain clinical practice guidelines. It is all about, can it work? We're giving grades to evidence, which is helpful, but it is not at all helpful to some of those other questions. Doing this experience has made me realize we need guidelines that talk about who is going to respond. I know there's not a lot of literature out there, but we continue to push towards the can it work. We'll be able to continue to give grades to evidence, but we won't be able to apply it in the way that we want to. And I was thinking about this. This is kind of like your kid coming home telling you, I'm in a class that got a lot of A's, and then saying, well, what grade did you get? And not being able to answer that, right? But I was in a class with a lot of A's, Dad. Well, what grade did you get? So, we have treatments with a lot of good grades, but I can't match it to the person to know how they're going to respond to it. So we need Lucy, but we also need Calvin. We need people that are going to ask these pesky questions that are a lot harder to answer. So the provides timely answers, which is a good time to check my time. Oh, I'm doing all right. This is the triangle, which again is another kind of cool illusion. So everyone knows we've learned a lot from the dinosaurs from the fossil record. The age of the dinosaurs there is in green, for those of you keeping score at home. We don't think of fossil records when we think of research, right? We think of late breaking findings and things like that. So what I did is I looked at some recently reported trials in low back pain, and I did not do a thorough search. I looked at articles that had recently reported an effect. So there was a difference between the treatment, and they were in the JAMA family network of journals. So that was my exhaustive search criteria. So one of them is from a colleague at WashU, Linda Van Dillen, in JAMA Neurology. And I don't want to talk all that much about the results. I want to look at two things. One, 100 months from starting this to reporting the results to learn an 8-point difference in oswestry. So if you divide the time by the information that you got there, it's a lot of time. This was a sensory motor training out of Australia. So this is 92 months for a 1-point difference in between sensory motor retraining, and somehow they got this as the comparator treatment. This still riles me up sometimes. Sham laser, shortwave diathermy, and sham non-invasive brain stimulation. That's the comparator treatment in this trial for a 1-point difference. We waited 92 months for that, and look at where it was reported. And then JAMA Psychiatry, all of these got pretty good press too, by the way, which made my job a little easier. This is the pain reprocessing therapy, which is going to be the latest really cool thing that comes down the pipe. This one did a little bit better, 62 months, but still a 1.5 point difference. And these, I just am showing the primary outcomes. So when we put this all, and I did want to put in a cohort study to show that this is not just an RCT thing. This is also cohort studies. This was our cohort study from the Target trial, 61 months, which is, on the lower end, and was able to describe the transition rate. So, as it's traditionally applied, it is too slow for current practice demands. And I think we've known that for a while, but when you map out, what really caught my eye in putting those slides together is we're waiting a long time for relatively small differences. And the comparators that they choose really limit the real world application. I would really like to know sensory motor therapy works against something that you would remotely consider using on a patient, not some triple sham, that we were talking about how we could even get that through our IRB. Like, I'm not sure we could get that through our IRB at Duke. So now, the illusions have been exposed. The trough of disillusionment is where we are now. To be really provocative, I would just end, but I did talk to Tony a little bit about this and some others, and he said you just can't leave it with that. And so, here's the, I told you, here's the fall, but get back up part. And part of this is to realize dinosaurs aren't extinct, right? They took that big hit, but the theropods survived and they evolved into birds. So the smallest survived and moved into birds. So what we need to do is think about this evolution or extinction and challenge some of these illusions. That one will hurt your eyes too if you look at it for a little while. And what we need to do is get much better, I think, at these three things. Trials that are nimble, flexible, and quick. Need to get better with our shapes that define rigor and quality. And get much, much better at predictive approaches. So here's the nimble, flexible, and quick. This is the raptor phase. And dinosaurs had feathers too now, they know that. That'll be in the after. That'll be in the director's cut, like the dinosaur part. One of the more inspiring things I saw was the presentation. I'm part of a pragmatic trials collaboratory at Duke. And they brought in one of the team members from the recovery trial. And if you're a clinical trialist and you are interested in clinical trials at all, the recovery trial is amazing. Martin Laundrie, I put him on there because these are his slides and I didn't ask him if I could use them, but I figured at least acknowledging them would patch that a little bit. But he did an excellent job in showing how the UK responded to COVID. And these were the principles they went by for clinical trials. Smart design, streamlined operations, integrated. So right away, the generalization, that generalization is taken care of. It's integrated. Enlightened regulatory approaches, which, that's a challenge, maybe depending on where it is, results in better patient care and public health. They have 6 qualities. It's all on the website. It's very, very inspiring. The coolest thing about the recovery trial is this is 2 years of their work. They started first draft of the protocol, 2020 March. First patient enrolled, March 19th. Look at when they had 10,000 patients enrolled, May 4th. 2020. Now, given this is for COVID, I know that was but we all work in areas that have similar public health impact, just not acutely as it was in COVID. They're reporting results on different medications almost in real time. It was amazing. Here was their recruitment. They had a nice little slogan, COVID can affect everyone, but the trial can affect anyone. but the trial is open to everyone. And you can see their enrollment just takes off, and that's because it's embedded. They had very generic entry criteria. And then the other thing that was really interesting is they were basically adequately powered for some of the most relevant things for prescribing the medications that, physicians would need. So there's age, sex, ethnicity, days since the symptoms onset. And, for those of you that are familiar with forest plots, you're used to seeing this, for multiple studies, but this is one study with patient subgroups that are relevant. And they would get to a point, predetermined when they could report on this. And I was probably the only one who saw this, who was a PT at Duke, but I just could imagine what, this with back pain and those, some different exercise programs and all the potential ways, treatment moderation. We could easily do some, trials like this with that type of volume and get more directive. Not only does it work, but for whom does it work, best, and answer some of those questions. There's got to be a few key areas. And of course, as I told you, my brain goes towards musculoskeletal pain just because that's where I've spent a lot of my time. So that was, I guess it's well known that I'm nerdy, or at least have nerdy tendencies, or maybe academic. That was one of the more inspiring things I saw on Zoom, during that, is just seeing how they really challenge the paradigm of trials. And I don't think it's only about COVID. I think there are some barriers that they pushed aside that, in their system, they're probably going to be able to walk right through. But for other people, we may have to think about it. But enrolling 10,000 in less than 2 months in any study it's super impressive. And we could do that. Like I said, we could do that with some conditions. So different shapes. So this is archival footage from Dean DeLito's youth here. So if you didn't catch it the first time, I kind of thought this is what you would do, Tony, that's how you would figure. But, I won't tell you where I found that or how I got it, but, it has yet to be verified. The pyramid, right? Everyone worships at this pyramid for EVP. And it is one of the most commonly used, this has driven quality assessment for a long time now. And one of the most commonly used quality scales is Pedro. 11 items on it, 1 related to external validity. So all about internal validity. And I think the item on external validity is something about the patient population, how representative it is from the overall, like, did you sample the people from the population? So clearly, that shape forces us, internal validity is greater than external. But when you look at evolution and things, like, it doesn't narrow to one point. It doesn't push you to one point. And most healthy systems actually, they broaden as they get more complex. They don't narrow. And the dinosaur to bird evolution is one of them. So we need shapes that foster this. And there's actually quite a few out there. I like this one. It keeps the pyramid theme, but it puts a little twist on it. So, people are familiar with it, but it shows how you move from clinical studies to the informatics intervention. And there's linkages. This is one that we've thought about. This is a common shape used in implementation, and notice how it broadens. And it's got 3 clear zones. Could it work? Does it work? And making it work. And I can tell you, if we had evidence that could fit all 3 of those, we would be in really good shape. So we need to get comfortable with different shapes. Predictive approaches. This, by the way, is probably the best pun I put on a slide in 5 years. So the example from another field. And you can ask me about it later if you don't get it, but it's a really good pun. So these are playoff predictions for baseball. And this is kind of the norm now in sports, right? We expect to get high level prediction. And I picked this one because it's pretty clear who's going to win in 2016, the Cubs, right? If I got this forecast for a patient, it would be pretty clear what's going on. This one's a little more jumbled, and it just happens to have the side effect of this is a year the Yankees weren't going to win. That's completely, unrelated. It's not hard to find one where the Pirates are not predicted to win, by the way. But this is a much more dynamic system. I ask you, can our providers offer this level of sophistication for predicting patient outcomes? Do we know when it's going to be turbulent? Do we know when it's going to be fairly stable? And systematically, we can't. So what can be done about this to make this more compatible with precision medicine? One is we need to get out of an inference mindset and into a prediction mindset. I have worked a lot now with people that are only concerned about prediction, and I can tell you they don't care why the variables are related. They just want variables that help you predict. And, a lot of our training, and I think rightfully so, is about, well, it has to make sense. Yeah, but, maybe not if it helps with the accuracy of the model. And then the temporal orientation, the difference between forecasting and telling what happened, I think is really important, change in mindset. The other thing is, prediction is something that is done trial and error. And I think we tend to get in a mindset. We do one study, those are the results, and that's it. Prediction is much more dynamic. And what better example than, weather? And I think it's so fascinating living in Florida, and this is not meant to diminish, anything that happened with Hurricane Ian. I lived in Florida for 15 years. And one of the things that I thought was fascinating is how accepted it is that there's different prediction models for tracking hurricanes, and people can deal with it because more or less transparent with what's in the model. They know what's driving it, and it's reported. And it's like, in this model, it's going to go this way. And in this model, it's going to go that way. We don't have that in healthcare. I would love to see what's the UPMC model for acute to chronic transition. And let's compare that to the Duke model. And what are the factors that make this model go right and this model go left? And think of all the progress in weather forecasting without any randomized trials that I'm aware of. They do have the bonus, the weather is constantly giving you data. So that is a huge advantage. But I do think, we need to get better at accepting the predictive models. They're going to be different, but as long as we know why they're different, they're actually helpful. And this hurricane forecasting, I can't think of a better way. And like I said, I'm not diminishing Hurricane Ian. I know plenty of people, including my own parents, who are very, very close to it. So now, if I may be so bold, we're getting to the slope of enlightenment. So some final thoughts. And I think really this is kind of what it boils down to is tension is healthy most of the time. And hopefully the way I'm going to wrap this up is just pointing out some tensions that, I don't think EBP can address, but we just have to deal with and make some decisions. So this is where I think, we're getting into. And notice, the plateau of productivity, the slope compared to that hype and the initial hype. You're still making progress, but it's just slower. It's deliberate, but it is, it's a positive slope. So there is this inherent tension that most best evidence studies are completely without any regard to how they're going to perform in the real world. That's how they're valued now. That JAMA study that I showed you, one of the most prestigious journals in the world. And I'm probably 10, 15% jealous that published there, but I'm also really, really curious how in the world they are going to interpret those findings based on their comparator. Like, it really bothers me, as you can tell. But that aside, there is that tension. So you have to be able to interpret the literature with that in mind. And here's, other than that JAMA article, which is on the front of the brain, here's what I have been struggling with for like 10 or 15 years. I know it can work. I know PIP can work. I also know it doesn't work at scale. And those are I don't know what to do with that other than I'm just going to keep working with people who are interested to know, can we get that doesn't work to something else? Because we know it can work. Can we, we have the ball. Can we ever get it to the point where it's going to fall when we let go of it? Or is it just going to hover there? There's also this tension that research, is designed to generate questions. I think EBP with that, if you think of that narrowing, there's this perception that it's going to give you answers. And I think of that conceptually where people, and this is, we're going to pick on the students a little bit, and we're allowed to do that. This is kind of what the students expect with evidence. They expect it to be turn by turn directions and telling you exactly where to go. But what really happens is you do get direction, but it's more of this type of older school guidance system. It's more North Star type of information. You should know the evidence base and you should know it really well, but don't expect it to give you, turn right in 50 feet. That's not how it's designed. And part of that is because every good study will generate more questions. So to wrap up, I read books other than dinosaur books, although I'm going to read the mammal one next. The Range is a really good book. And one of the things that a lot of people, not just myself, have picked up on Range is the differentiation between kind and wicked learning. So kind learning is, and chess and golf are on there because they're used as examples. They are highly repeatable. There's some constraints that exist, but you get feedback right away. The feedback is accurate and you can incorporate it. So that's a kind learning environment. The other thing that is interesting about kind learning is experience helps. So I think EBP was designed for kind learning environments. I think that is where it fits really well. Feedback, constraints, repeatability. Wicked learning environments, which to me, I'm going to bias you, sounds a lot more like healthcare, the delivery of healthcare. It's open-ended. Useful information is often scarce. Feedback, if it comes, it's delayed. And guess what? You don't always know if it's accurate or not. Golf, you hit the ball right down the middle of the fairway or you're 3 fairways over. With some of the things that we deal with in healthcare, you're not going to get that feedback right away. And if you're not measuring it, you're never going to get it. So, that is. And the thing that's very interesting is there's a big question whether past experience is helpful or not in wicked learning. Because how do you know, based on, the feedback doesn't necessarily help you. And there's a story, I'll lift it just briefly. In the 1800s, there was a physician who was very famous, I think, for diagnosing typhoid. And he would palpate the patients and do all this stuff, and then they would get typhoid. And they found out it was not that he was a great diagnostician, it was that he had typhoid and was giving it to everyone. So that is an example of, he thought he was getting, but the feedback was wrong. He was 100% accurate, but not for the reason that he won. So I think, when I think of wicked environments, which certainly to me describes trying to do real world research, that we must have a more radical evolution that addresses these illusions that, EBP is going to help us with precision and personalized medicine, that it provides timely answers, and that internal validity, always wins. So with that, I will thank all of you for the honor. And we do some of our research updates from that Twitter handle if you're interested. But I do really thank everyone. And Jay said there may be some questions or not. I did okay on time. Yeah.
So, Steve, thank you for that great presentation. And I'm sure there's quite a few questions. I know that Rosemary would be very happy and she would love to sit down with a beer with you and talk a little bit more about the study. So any questions from the audience to start? No, can't be that. So how do we pull this off? I mean, you're going to need to establish some type of a network, right? And you've got to deal with regulatory things and you got to deal with funding. right? How are you going to get funders to, take the risk on something like this, right?
I mean, thanks for the really hard question. I mean, honestly, I have no idea. I would like to think some of, we're very early in this. So some of the experiences that people have had with pragmatic trials and embedded research are really going to help, hopefully alert the sirens and get some funders that are interested. And I also think we have to explore novel partners. There should be health systems that are interested. And I know, there's one here that is very interested and has done some of this, but I think that needs to be more of a broader partnership, because when you work with industry partners or health system partners, that 100 months ain't going to cut it, right? They want to know much more quickly, and researchers can deliver when that pressure is there, as long as the infrastructure and the access to the information is there. So I think it'll be a gradual progress, but part of it also just has to be, steering people in the right direction, that if they want to do things that impact care more directly, they might have to think of a different paradigm, because they could follow something that is well established and, end up in the situation with the extremely, highly internally valid study that, can't be applied. So I think and I know in, NIH, when you say funding, I automatically think of NIH. I know there are some institutes that are a little more vested in implementation work. So that's encouraging.
No.
I don't know the score of the Yankee game, Tony, so if that's the question. Oh, yeah. Yeah. Tony.
Okay. All right. Steve, I wanted to first of all, to comment on Jay's question. The willingness is really an issue on the part of systems. Systems are willing when you hold a gun to their heads. They had to do it with COVID, and it was really great that they responded the way they did. If back pain started killing people, they would do it. I mean, we would see these kinds of things. But there are, and I like this wicked environment thing that you talk about. But there are systems out there that are willing. Those are the systems that are at risk, that are going at risk. We just don't tend to seek them out. You do your stuff at Duke. We do our stuff here at UPMC.
Right.
It's variable in terms of how that's going to get across. But when it's clear when there's an external force. The other thing I would throw in is the total joint bundling. That was a clear path that all of a sudden, we weren't very innovative, but we changed practice overnight and things changed for the positive. And there were some pretty good outcomes that came out of that too. But I think that we write grants to satisfy NIH. We don't write grants to satisfy health systems. And I think, really this marriage between the funder and the systems really needs to happen.
Yeah.
And the priorities need to be laid out. And then the people in the systems have to have their feet held to the fire, because these results sometimes don't help them, right? They lose money instead of gain money when you treat people more efficiently.
Right.
If we got rid of all the low value care and back pain, a lot of systems would lose a ton of money. So I guess what I'm saying, I don't have it's not the question, it's just to spur more discussion about how to get pragmatic and move forward, because I have an awful lot of gray hair. And I said, I'd love to I used to say I'd like to conduct one positive trial before I hang it up. Now I'm one of these people that just says, I'd like to see one, a real generalizable trial.
I was going to say, well, non-invasive brain stimulation, just use that as your comparator.
Right.
you're choosing the wrong comparator. But it is a good point. I mean, if so, yeah, I obviously well above my pay grade, but I agree, getting, I would like to think things like the opioid crisis, there was some momentum there with when you talk about other external forces, but, and I think things like the HEAL initiative and they are trying, there's some very non-pragmatic things, but there are some other pragmatic leaning, but I agree with you. I mean, it would be really innovative to see that type of collaboration, but you're right. It's going to cut their bottom line. And so that's a major disincentive to be more efficient, which is really sad.
Other questions? Comments? Oh, sorry. Thank you.
For Manny?
Hi, Dr. George.
Hello.
I had a question with respect to when you were talking about the rise and the fall of evidence-based practice here. With respect to the fall, would you be able to explain that a little more beyond? I understand the limitations, but I'm thinking about like a change in trajectory that occurred for, say, like the visibility that was presented there, or
I'm sorry. Can you give me can I ask for a phone a friend are you asking for? No, I'm not. I'm trying to understand the question. What are you asking for? Because I don't think of it as a trajectory. I think of it like, that's why I tried to use more of the illusion. This is what people perceive evidence-based practice does, which is helps us, for example, learn more about precision medicine. But in my experience, and it doesn't. I use the practice guidelines as an example only because that was something I was involved with 2+ years, longer if you count. And it's supposed to be viewed as this kind of pinnacle of evidence. In a lot of ways it is, but it's not necessarily the pinnacle for saying, who responds. I can give you the grade for spinal manipulation, but I can't tell you who is likely to respond to spinal manipulation. And I think one of those sounds a lot more like precision medicine than the other. And EBP is aligned with the one which is about giving the grade to the treatment, not aligned with saying, who responds best to this treatment. Does that help at all?
Yes, I was thinking.
I am an abstract sequential person, so there are some folks that I just, have a hard time with. So not just communicating with. So I will try to make it as concrete as possible. You just have to lead me to the water, give me the straw, and then I'll drink.
Okay, so what I was thinking about in like a chronological aspect, where, say, how we talked about with the rise, where we talked about some historical events for evidence-based practice. And then with rising again, talking about some very recent innovations of what is promoting evidence-based practice. And I'm just thinking about that in-between period, if there were like any particular instances beyond characteristics that have been pretty much constant with evidence-based medicine, if that makes sense.
Well, I think, if you're thinking of specific kind of like triggers or, those trials I put up, because I think in some ways they epitomize what is best evidence and people are very happy and excited about those. But I had a very different reaction to those and I tried to share that. And that to me was in that trough. I of all people should be all super excited about new treatments for pain. And when I looked at those, I was not as, and like I said, 15% is jealousy. I have resolved that with myself, but the rest of it is, look at the comparators, look at how long it took those studies and look at what the gain was for that. And can we do better? Can we get those same, if we could get those same results in half the time, that's improvement. But the way it will be until people start thinking about it, people will be happy to take, that's like 5 to 8 years to get that information out. And I do take the part about responding to the opioid crisis seriously. Tony mentioned COVID was a huge external force. We're still in the middle, right, of we still need to be much, much better at providing non-pharmacologic care options and knowing who's going to respond to those and knowing those things. And those trials should be, like I said, celebrated, and in a lot of areas they were. But when I had my Scully lecture mind on, I interpreted those differently.
Thank you.
Yeah, and we can talk a little bit more. I didn't mean to be cranky. It has been a long day, I will tell you that.
I think, you can think about, does it work? But what you're saying is, who does it really work for?
Right.
And that's what you're talking about with precision medicine.
One part of it, right?
Yeah. Last question.
Oh, I want to end it. Oh, dear. So one colleague of mine, which you may know in the back pain space, John Lurie, he sort of leans towards going right to effectiveness. And it just feels like a question for you to sort of give your impressions on. If all this money and time and effort is spent on these, like the trial that you showed, these kind of really basic efficacy questions, do we need that step?
I mean, it's a really good question. And for those who, I think this mic's a little bit better. It's, if effectiveness is where this is kind of rubber meets the road, do we need efficacy studies? I think, and there actually are some guidelines for like doing effectiveness studies. And you're not surprised to know, number one is it has to have demonstrated efficacy somewhere. So I do think there is some value to there being signal. Now, do we have to do phase one? That part, like I'd like to see, like a fast track to effectiveness so people don't feel it has to be so deliberate to get there. And, but there are some people who would answer very differently and want to follow the more traditional, you got to show safety, feasibility, except in all of that. So I think there are some ways we can shorten that path, but, the shape going out certainly points to we should be spending more time on effectiveness and really being clear where those differences are. That's why I like that implementation pipe, because it's very clear where the transition of how the question you're answering changes, and that impacts the design, it impacts the measures, it impacts who you're working with. So I would give, I would like to think we're studying things that have a little bit of a signal. But I don't want to spend multiple, iterations of that. I want to push it along. Yeah. I mean,
there's Kurt Spindler. I don't know if you know Kurt. Kurt is with Cleveland Clinic, and he's advocated for years that what are needed are good prospective observational studies. And they've done a study called Moon and a study called Mars. And they have contributed greatly to identifying, factors that affect outcome. And they've been able to create nomograms and other tools to look at who's going to benefit or who's going to be at risk for ACL outcomes.
Yeah, no, I agree. And Kelly, I think the only thing you lose out on observational studies, which I don't think, depending on the question or what you're interested, may or may not matter, is that cause and effect. Like people get way hung up on that, Exactly.
Fast track it to the effectiveness studies.
Yeah. Yeah. Or just stay. I mean,
because what holds everybody up is the proof of concept, right?
Right.
If you don't have that, you're not getting the money. So this is a way that probably be cheaper and quicker. And but people have to accept that would be all right.
And I think developing super or much more accurate prediction is the observational realm too. I mean, there was a study I reviewed and I was excited because they were predicting some things but the range, like the error of the prediction was so big, it was like the whole scale. We have to get better with that. I mean, one of the things we're supposed to be able to do is forecast. People would not be happy if the hurricane is going to hit the United States somewhere, but that's kind of where we are, right? There's a disturbance and it's going to hit the US. You know, that we live with that when it's 30 days away, but when it gets closer. So when patients are coming to us, you know, how long is this going to last? What are my likely outcomes going to be? You know, I think you could spend a lot of time in that design and you know, figure that out. Dr. Hicks.
You know, thinking about this issue of moving from efficacy to effectiveness studies, I guess my question to you would be, do you think we pay enough attention to what the variability in our sample looks like in those efficacy studies? And is that the reason why we have the problem when we get to the effectiveness side of the equation?
I mean, it's certainly, the question was, you know, and I'm assuming you're talking to like the variability of the sample, sociodemographic characteristics. You know, is that another factor that impacts this lost in translation? Definitely. You know, I think that generalizability, the reason I like that is gravity and generalizability both begin with G, so it's clever. The other thing is, yeah, and Greg, but the other thing is there's so many things in generalizability, and everyone attributes it to the effect of the treatment that we observe in this very sterile distilled environment. So yeah, I mean, it's, as you know, I don't need to tell you, it's scary sometimes when you see the composition of efficacy studies and, you know, preclinical studies that are done on, you know, graduate students for beer money type of stuff. And they show like a physiologic effect in 18 white people and let's go, you know, we got this. So I do think there should be a lot more attention to that. And you can do that with intentional sampling. You know, there are ways. But I think that mindset, Greg, is of someone who knows they're going to move it to effectiveness right away. You know, they're going to have to answer to people other than, you know, just the P is less than 0.05. They're going to have to think about other things. So I think that's a great, you know, comment.
Okay, thank you all for coming, and thank you for Steve for a fantastic lecture, and have a good evening.